See that you're born an Italian if you want your life to be great. See that you're born an Italiano and your life will be great.
How about some Didato?
That's a nice.
Hey there, Paisani, and welcome back to another episode of the Italian American Podcast. I'm John Viola, along with the notorious POB, the Italian American Wikipedia, Mr. Patrick O'Boyle, here at the corner of Mulberry and Grand, the heart of Little Italy, the crossroads of Italian America, Red Sauce Studio, coming to you with a great episode today, one that we have been waiting for a long time, very excited about, and one that I think everybody out there who has grown up in or around the United States or a myriad of other countries is going to have some familiarity with, and the inner child in all of us is going to be, I think, tickled pink, tickled at least red, white, and green by today's episode. Thank you guys, everybody out there, for listening, for watching along here on YouTube. If you're watching, please do us a favor, give us a comment, give us a like, make a subscription, and sign up for updates when these shows come out. It does a lot to further our mission here at the Italian American Podcast to bring you a weekly dose of Italian American heritage, history, and hilarity. So thank you for your continued support. We rely on it.
That was a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot.
Can I cut to the chase?
Go ahead, cut to the chase.
Because a lot of them just like...
You do the Pat version.
You have to like and subscribe.
It helps.
We're not
us.
asking you, we're telling you, because we need this.
It's a
If
different
you
version.
want... am I on that camera? Whose camera?
Yeah, that's you.
If you want a positive image of Italian Americans and you agree with what we're doing, we need to grow this baby, and you have to help us. Because since we went from radio to television, right, now that we're on YouTube, I don't understand this stuff, but the people John speaks to say we have to get likes. You have to talk to a consultant.
Yes.
Likes, subscribes, and you have to repost it.
Mm-hmm.
I hate being filmed on this thing. You know that. I much rather when it was radio, and I could be in my basement in my pajamas and left in peace.
Yes.
But we all made sacrifices for the cause because we're getting more viewers on YouTube, and we're able to spread a positive message. So if you want to help us with the positive message, because we're killing ourselves doing this, you have to do your part, like, subscribe, and promote us. Even if you don't like us personally, for the general cause, what we're involved in,
right.
Just go and do it anyway.
So that's our appeal. And as we're doing it, it reminds me of the first time I think anybody hears one of these kind of appeals where they're all based off of is in the days of your watching public television, right? That was a great thing to rely on these appeals.
That is, God bless you, that's brilliant.
Yeah, think about that, right?
We brand ourselves as the Italian American PBS.
Yes,
whether it's
yeah.
deserved or not, it's the
Yes.
myth that lives in my mind.
It's the myth
Right?
that
That
lives
makes
in your
me
mind.
feel better.
Yes, it is. Yes. Yeah. And
I'm the Terry Gross of Italian America.
You are the Terry Gross of Italian America,
You
yes.
know her husband's Italian.
Is that right?
I was going to have him on.
You should.
If we could get him.
Yeah, that'd be great. Why not? If you're into your heritage and Mr. Terry Gross, whoever you are out
get
there.
her on was like being married to an Italian.
Do it. Why not? This is what Pat always thinks of.
This is what goes through my mind
our
at 2 o'clock in the
operation
morning.
as the PBS of Italian America, and we have somebody today who is very familiar with the world of. It's not public television anymore. Actually, it started in public television. We're talking about the changes in what is an American institution and a global institution, Sesame Street. So John Didato is the. Let me get this right. Senior Creative Director / Editor at Sesame Workshop. And he's come here to talk about a film that he's done himself, but also his work with one of the most beloved...
An award-winning film.
An award-winning
From
film.
the Russo
Yep,
brothers.
that's right. But one of the most beloved institutions out there in the world, really, is these amazing characters that came out of the mind of Jim Henson amongst some other great founders. So, John, thank you for being here, and what an amazing life you must have at the happiest street in the world.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's a wonderful place to work. It's a wonderful place, and our mission is something I truly believe in, and it feels good to go to work every day.
Yeah, it's got to be really just, I mean, the pleasantry of the environment, you know. Did you grow up watching Sesame Street?
I did very much. I was born very close to the date it first aired and watched it ever since my youth. I have very fond memories of my brother and sister and I just watching it and imitating the characters.
It's amazing how much it's impacted so many people's lives now after 67. How many? It's
been on 55 years.
55
Yes.
years. That's not the longest running show in television.
I believe it's a news show that's longer, but we're one of the longest.
That's amazing. 55 years to do
I
anything.
think Meet the Press is the longest.
That might be it. The news show I was thinking
Or maybe
about.
one of the soap operas or something like that they started when TV was, nascent. But to me, 5.5 decades of impacting young people and at a really radical departure from anybody's thoughts around education and access to this kind of stuff. I mean, it was a very radical concept to be out educating through the television, right?
Yes, the history of it begins with our founder, Joan Gans Cooney, and a researcher, Lloyd Morissette. And they were at a cocktail party. And Lloyd was saying how his granddaughter was watching TV and she would remember these jingles. And he goes to Joan, he goes, famously, I wonder if television can be used to help teach children. And she goes, I don't know, but I'd like to find out. And they presented a paper and they got funding and they did many test shows. And what they found out was the kids would pay attention, but they'd pay more attention when there was a Muppet on screen. And so they incorporated the Muppets more into the process. And back then they actually had really good funding to start this off. And it became a success pretty much once it was released.
Yeah, I mean, and really radical in not just the delivery of educational content and the idea that you could impact a child, through this medium, but also some of the stuff that it covered around society and race and gender and abilities and all of these, death and things like that. It broke so many boundaries. It really has become an institution that people rely on and trust. So it's a great heritage and patrimony to be a part of. What led you to this career?
I was always interested in filmmaking, and I think I get that love from my mother. She grew up in the 50s and watched all these wonderful films, and she would come home and she'd play them for us. So I was educated early on with Hitchcock and John Ford and Frank Capra and all the movies of her youth. And I think most people pursue their career based on some influence from their parents. And while my mother didn't say go into filmmaking, her love of filmmaking was something, her love of films was something that I appreciated and was drawn to. And so, I worked my way up from a PA carrying boxes to associate producer and then a producer and director. And then I was sitting behind the editor and I got bored and I said, I need to learn editing. And it worked out really well. And I think it's one of my greatest talents is editorial.
It's so interesting to me for the audience that doesn't think in these terms, right? Because we throw around, who directed, who this, that, but the movie, the sausage making process in this kind of content is oftentimes misunderstood. And when I took over the podcast from Dolores and Anthony and we came on, we had a company that we sent stuff to be edited, and basically like you'd get a transcript and you'd say, take this part out, take that part out. And I said, our conversations were so cumbersome, really. Like, some of them, and we would go 5 hours. I was like, I can't send this to somebody. I have to learn to do this. I didn't mean to look right at you.
I didn't want to look at you, but
no, but my point is, but I had to learn to do it. And I wanted to learn to do it. And it took a long time even afterwards for me, even when we were knocking them out in an hour, to turn it over to Nikki eventually, because there's so much creativity that goes into editing. It's like basically writing a book using film or audio as the source material, right? As a works cited in some sense. And you can do so much. And I've had a conversation with a guy not that long ago talking about the difference between narrative film and television and plays. And he said, documentaries are the editor's medium. And you are here to talk about a documentary that you put together and was an award-winning documentary at the Russo Brothers Film Festival. So tell us about that.
Well, so it starts off with I attended the National Italian American Foundation Gala in 2018. And before the gala, they have this expo, and there's this...
You know whose baby that was?
Whose baby was that?
John.
That was mine.
Well, that was great. That's why I was there.
They did away with it, I think, the year after that. 2018 was the first one I was not at, I think. Anyway,
Correct.
yeah.
And there was the room with the Italian American Film Festival, and I'm like, forum, and I was, what is this? And I walked in, I saw 3 great films, and I talked to one of the filmmakers, and they encouraged me, and I'm like, I'm coming back. I'm gonna make a film. Now, what do I make a film about? You know, and documentaries are a lot about access. You know, what around you, what world do you live in, what world do you know, what world could you tell a story about? And I look around, and the cameraman from Sesame Street is Italian American, and the writer is Italian American, and the performers are Italian American. Some of the puppeteers are Italian American, and I go, there's something here. So I interviewed a lot of people, more than I could put in the documentary, and I put the two together, and it's myself and my producer Frank Campagnas. It's our love letter to Sesame and our Italian American heritage. So by combining those two, I was able to make this film, which I love and I'm very proud of.
That's amazing, really. I am so encouraged by the continual revelation. People like yourself who are, in our generation, so integrated at the highest levels of so many important things and institutions around the country, who still can kind of look through the world through those red, white, and green lenses and say, like, oh, there's Italians here, and and then think about telling that story. It encourages what we do. And it's a great balm to the naysayers who will say, well, people aren't really interested in their heritage anymore. I think we as a community are very much interested, and I love that you kind of saw that view out there. What was the process like as you introduced it to these other Italian Americans?
Well, with the documentary, I try to have a structure, but you also, a lot of it is you do not know where you're going to wind up. You know, you start out with an idea, and what people start talking about, you follow along, and they lead you into places that you didn't think of. And I originally thought I would have a documentary with 8 people, 5 minutes each, and what I wound up with was a documentary with 3 people and 10 minutes each. Because the stories were so good, it was hard to get them very short. And, what you're doing is like what a documentarian is doing. It's collecting these stories, listening to these stories, and sharing them.
Yeah.
Because that's one of my greatest fears is these stories go away.
Yeah.
And they're beautiful stories. And Italian Americans are very good at telling stories, very good at telling long stories too, right?
Yeah.
So the process was interviewing a lot of people and then selecting what was achievable, because I had a very short turnaround time before the actual forum that year. And what was the most interesting, I thought, for the audience, right? So we selected 3 people: Frank Biondo, who's the cameraman from day one of Sesame Street, and Linda Bove, who was Linda, the librarian on the show for 30 years, and then Chrissy Farrar, who's a writer who's written basically since she got out of college, and she's been there 30 years by now.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yes, and they were great subjects. And for me, it's the honor is letting them tell their stories and trying to support what they're saying visually, support what they're saying in terms of editorial, choosing the best parts. There were so many stories on the cutting room floor that I love, but you just can't get everything in.
Did you find when you brought this to the subjects, they were like my fear with a lot of these things when it's like, you pick whatever you're looking at and you go, oh, there's Italian here and there's Italian here. And then you go, I have this like sort of reservation that says I'm going to reach out to them and they're going to go, I'm not interested in this stuff. Did you think about that? And what did you encounter when you did go to them?
Honestly, everyone was interested and willing to do it and so supportive and helpful.
That's great.
So I was, very lucky. And that is kind of our way there. So it worked out very well. Some of these people, they want to share their stories. And they were, the stories were growing up, your Italian American heritage, and then, your experience with Sesame Street,
It's I guess for me, it's always like, are they gonna relate to the Italian part, And you seem to have gotten subjects that did.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, all of them had such an upbringing that was surrounded by the Italian American experience. From Frankie, who grew up in Brooklyn, to Linda, grew up, both of her parents are deaf and both were Italian American.
Really?
Yes, I mean it's just fascinating. And then Christine, her family, they all lived around the same area in New Jersey, and she tells it in the film. My uncle, I had an uncle down the block. My grandmother was across the street. I lived with a different grandmother. So she was surrounded by the Italian American experiences. I was brought up in Staten Island, but my whole family lived in the New York City area.
Was Staten Island? You're how old?
Wow.
Well, I mean,
I'm 55. I'm
55.
actually, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when you were growing up, was Staten Island as Italian as it became?
Oh, I think it was even more so.
It was more so.
Honestly, when I went to school, there was Italians and Irish and a couple of other different ethnicities. Yeah.
All Brooklyn diaspora.
Probably, yes, because I was born in Brooklyn, raised in Staten Island.
Did Staten Island become Italian? I mean, how long after the bridge is built in 60, whatever it is, 65, 66?
But they
64,
were
that's right.
They
now.
were there in Rosebank. The Italians
No, I know
there,
they were, but they weren't in the numbers that they were after the bridge,
well,
right?
I guess, none of us were there for it, right? So I can't say what Staten Island looked like, or you can't say, because we didn't drive around Staten Island in 1950. Peter Battaglia could probably give us a good idea, people who lived there before the bridge was built in 64. But I just think that it just concentrated the movement from Brooklyn to a suburb.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as, you had the people who went to Long Island, and then you had the people that went to Staten Island. But I think the age thing, I know that me and John always ask that question, but I'm going to be 49 plus 1 in January, and we just filmed at the Villa Roma. We just taped at the Villa. I'm sure you're familiar. Growing up in
Yes, I've
Staten
heard
Island.
of it. Yeah.
And I said to John, their peak years, when we talked to the chef, were like 1983, and they were the years I was up there, right? And I feel that there was like a peak that crested right in those years. And then in the early 90s, changes started to come. They got rid of lunch because they would have an Italian lunch every afternoon, and then lunch became optional and stuff like that. But I feel everybody says they saw the last, right, of whatever it was. The people born before the war and after the war, and the early Gen Xers. But there is a crescendo, right? So I do think there's some stuff that we experienced that I'll tell you something that I remember talking about television, oh shucks, John, what's his name? Who's the boss?
Tony Danza.
So I remember Tony Danza was one of the only Tony Danza on Who's the Boss, and Sophia and the grandmother.
It was
Sophia
the grandmother and Dorothy.
And Dorothy on
the Golden Girls,
right? So if you take Italian Americans, that was our
representation
on television, right? And I think we were ethnic enough at that time, at least for our grandparents who were the World War II generation, that they kind of honed in on the same way when they went to vote, they looked for the person with the vowel at the end of their name. I think that our representation I don't know how to explain it. I think we had a limited representation, and when they were represented on TV, like Vincent Gardenia when he was on All in the Family,
yeah,
right, and he acts kooky, right, and then Archie Bunker, whenever he's on, he does something kooky. He goes, "Well, he's an Italian, right? Well, your husband cooks." He goes, only real men don't cook, but he's Italian, so he gets a pass because you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I think it's so important what you did, because even if we weren't, even if there wasn't an Italian American character on Sesame Street, there was an Italian American representation there behind the scenes.
Absolutely, that was the actual pitch, I think, for the show, is to show Italian Americans in media behind the scenes. Although some were in front, like Linda, but the you didn't know that she was Italian.
Yeah.
And in fact, until I did research, I didn't realize that she was Italian American because it just wasn't obvious. And sometimes that's great too. We're just person.
We're just there.
And again, as I know you've discussed on the show before, is Italian American representation sometimes is very limited in film and television, and showing that there are positive role models in front and behind the camera. That was exactly what this film was hoping to achieve.
Because I just feel like on Who's the Boss, they stereotype Tony Danza, and I remember it then, and I think of it now. You didn't have Italian Americans. Look at Moonstruck, right? The professor was an Italian American. The one that, what's her name? Olympia Dukakis almost had the affair with, right? But her husband was a guy who was a little bit of a shyster who was selling plumbing equipment.
Right.
So even when we were represented, it still went to the, what's the words I'm looking for?
There were some tropes.
The tropes, yeah. They
Yeah.
still was there. They never. I mean, you had Hispanic representation
Oh yes, very much so.
on Sesame Street. But
The
there never
Luis-
was a defined Italian American character
That's correct. That yes,
yet.
yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's interesting because up until recently, there was no ethnicity to any puppets or the characters on Sesame Street. Now there is some, and it's a little bit more of an effort, especially.
I think Sesame Street. I mean, I'm going back to when in the late '70s.
Yeah.
I think there was Hispanic representation.
No, yeah, in the human
in the
characters
human
for sure.
characters, yeah.
But it's interesting to me to think, here's Linda, who I think, again, 50-something years of television. Most generations of American kids who watch this show, we all know Linda, right? And like everything I knew as a child about hearing impairment was because of Linda being on Sesame Street and Bob, and it's interesting to think that in 1969. Especially because we know, 2 years, like The Godfather's just coming out. There's all these protests. 2 years later, you're going to have Joe Colombo and the Civil Rights League. And then you're going to have the article in Red, White, and Greening in New York Magazine and all this sort of, again, NIAF comes around in 1975. So we are not nearly as integrated or assimilated as we are today. But I guess we're at a point enough where when this show that is about that kind of consciousness of community building in an urban environment like New York, where we were, such a significant number, they will make efforts to say, okay, here's Hispanic culture, here's African American culture, but we're not an interest group at that point. So you can sort of see, like, even though we're about to hit that crest of community awareness and activity and sort of self-leadership, from institutions like the Sesame perspective, from non-Italians, we're sort of already there, right? That they're like, they consider us there. They don't have to put us, I think, I sense. Because otherwise you could have easily just said, here's Linda and she's Italian-American, but it wasn't a factor. It wasn't a facet of her personality that they needed to explore.
I think, you probably because you wanted to lead with the fact that she was someone with who was deaf.
Right.
And what she says in the documentary is, I didn't want people to see me as a deaf person. I wanted them to see me as a person who happened to be deaf.
Right.
And one of the intentional constructs of the show was to show people from all different ethnicities, all different cultures, just interacting together and not bringing it up.
Yeah.
It's just, that's our street. That's our friend Luis. That's our friend Gordon. That's our friend Maria. That's our friend Big Bird.
Yeah,
exactly
that's
our
right.
friend Elmo, whatever it might be. We're just all friends and all people can get along. And
That's the beauty of the show.
I mean, the show has a very New York feel to it.
and that was intentional. They actually would go to neighborhoods that don't exist anymore. Before Lincoln Center was built, that whole area was raised. And they used that as the inspiration for it. And if my story is correct, this is a story from a different person. The stoop, which is our most famous, iconic part of the set, they actually built it of cement because they wanted that sound, that feel when you walked up, that it wasn't a fake wooden.
Wow.
It is now fake, but
Really, yeah.
back then it wasn't. Well, it's fake now because they can remove some of the steps and you can put them
You
up
can
at
puppeteer
purpose,
through.
yeah, underneath it. Mhm.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yes,
I mean,
and it's also a lot less heavy to move.
Yeah. It's so funny you say that because I'm a Brooklyn-born, went to Jersey, suburban upbringing, ran back to Brooklyn. My wife's from the Bronx, and we were living in Brooklyn. We had our daughter; she's now 3, and we moved a couple years ago to the suburbs. And I was out with my daughter the other day and bought pumpkins to make jack-o'-lanterns. And I said to her, "Oh, we're going to go out on the stoop." And she said, "What's the stoop?" And I said, "Well, it's the step in front of the house. I don't have a real stoop. I have just one step." And I thought to myself, wow, I guess Sesame Street has now gone all over the world, right? I mean, there's dubbed versions every country, including Italy. There's at this point, what's the word I'm looking for? Proprietary versions where they have their own characters and stuff all over the world, and everybody has seen the stoop through this thing. And the stoop is such a central part of our.
It's a Dutch word.
It is a Dutch
It's
word.
a New York
yeah,
Dutch
it's a Dutch word. Yeah, and I think not only are you taking very basic lessons of get-alongism, but you're taking that idea of the stoop where everything unfolds out in the world, and that's a New York thing, but it's also a very Italian thing. Life unfolding outside in the street, right, in the piazza or in the
You
village
know what
square.
impressed me?
Yeah.
If you go to like to Salerno on the Cilento, in front of their houses, like things click to me when I'm there. They have these stone benches in front of the houses.
Yes.
That people sat on.
Yeah.
Like I understood where did the stoop culture, where did the sitting in front of the house culture come from?
Yeah.
Because you had narrow streets that were really air vents,
Mm-hmm.
right, to keep the sun out and to keep air moving, and the house was probably very hot in the summer. And I mean, they're not used there like they were, but people have like I would say maybe the length of this couch, and this stone thing protruding, this like stone bench, and you'd put something soft underneath, and then you'd sit in front of it. You know how that came to my mind? I always thought Italian people would never sit on the stairs that they walked on. Right? They'd be obsessed with that. 'Cause my dress is dirty.
interesting
And now
you
I
say
realize
that.
that was an Americanization because
Yeah.
they were sitting on a bench.
Well, my grandmother and her sisters and everything, they always had lawn chairs. Came out on the stoop or around the stoop. I think my dad's generation was let's sit on the stoop. My grandmother would never sit on the steps.
Does the stoop go with us, that word? Like pocketbook?
I was thinking about that.
I think
the
we're
other day.
taking pocketbook with
No,
us.
I maybe Sesame
Everybody
Street
says
saved the word
purse now.
stoop. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Do they still call it the stoop on Sesame Street?
Yes, and I mean, I remember my cousin. She has a very, very close knit community on her block, and everyone's on the stoop.
I love that.
You know,
Where
it
is
still
that?
is. It's Staten Island.
Because Staten Island is still so much Brooklyn.
I
It's a
guess
common. I mean, like, it's
Yeah.
like it holds the flame.
Yeah, Staten
It's
Island's a
it's
Brooklyn
second
colony.
step. It's,
Absolutely,
it's a
yeah.
Brooklyn colony.
The Magna Graecia of Brooklyn
Yeah,
is
it's-
Staten
it's
Island.
Staten
yeah, sure.
Island.
Yeah, and a lot of parts of Jersey at this point. But yes, that's true. And along Long Island too.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the documentary?
Yeah, so the documentary is chaptered basically with three main interview subject. Frankie Biondo, the cameraman from day one on Sesame Street. Linda Bove, who is an actress who portrayed Linda the Librarian for 30 years. And Chrissy Ferrara, who has been writing for the show and continues to write for the show for 30 years. And so Frankie's story is fantastic because here's someone who was there on the first day. And he was used to shooting the World's Fair. He was used to shooting sports shows. And he gets called into the studio, and there's an 8-foot yellow bird just walking down the street talking to kids. And he's like, what did I get myself into? He couldn't believe that this is what his job was. And over the years, he has become such a figure for the show behind the scenes. He's affectionately called the mayor of Sesame Street. He's the one who used to organize the parties or the T-shirts. And he's just such a wonderful guy. And he says it himself. He just wants everyone to get along and be like a family.
What are some of the other stories? Like, what are some of the stories that didn't make it that you wanted to put in the documentary and there just wasn't enough room?
Frank has a great story where back in those days, in the early 60s, late 50s, when you wanted to get in television, you went to a smaller market. So he's up in Massachusetts in a small market, and his coworker comes back to work on Monday, and he's got a limp. And he goes, what happened? He goes, well, I went to New York to audition for a job, and I got the job. I go out on 6th Avenue, I get hit by a cab. Well, now I can't take the job. He goes, give me that guy's number. And he calls the guy, and he goes to New York, and he gets that guy's job. And it was a great story that didn't seem to fit in, but it was just the way he told it was so funny. And that's one of the joys of being a documentarian, is that I'll hear stories that unfortunately the public won't. In gathering all these elements to put into a film, there's always going to be more that can't fit in. And it's actually one of the beauties of the job. You try so hard to put in the best stories, but some of the stories that are great just don't make the final cut.
Are there any other ones that didn't make the final cut? I mean, you must have so many, but there's got to be
So
a few. Rosetta Costantino, a friend of mine, and even Arthur Schwartz, who I mention all the time on the show, they did these epic cookbooks. And then the editor comes in and says, you can't put this, and you can't. And they have another cookbook that is from the leftovers of the first cookbook, and they'll still post and say, "Wow, I wish I could have put this recipe in." You must have more of those stories.
Oh, absolutely. So Linda has an amazing story. One of the most the famous episodes of Sesame Street is the episode when Maria and Luis get married. And she tells the story that she only found out years later. They had offered Bob the opportunity to marry Linda on the show. But Bob at the time, Bob McGrath, who's a wonderful, wonderful man, was a wonderful man, he was traveling a lot. He had young children, and he didn't want them to get confused by seeing him marry another woman on the show. So he turned that opportunity down. So instead of the pivotal episode, Maria marries Luis, it could have been Linda marries Bob. And for people who know the show, that's pretty mind-blowing because that was a part of our history.
What did non-Italian Americans who were involved in Sesame Street kind of, I don't want to say question, but not get what you were doing? Like, what does Italian American have to do with working here on the show?
I think that it's more of just showing the representation. And I think everyone is very proud of their heritage and culture. And this is the stories I can tell. Other people can tell other stories, and there are many other documentaries made about Sesame Street. But this is the story that I was specifically fitted, or it was a good fit for me to tell and to talk to. Also, it's good to know that subject material. I grew up, obviously, in an Italian-American household, so I can relate to the people who are telling me these stories in some ways, and I can understand where they're coming from. So I think that anytime you're trying to promote a positive image, regardless of who it's about, people really do help and get behind it. And I had a lot of help with this documentary.
Do you think there's any aspects that they had culturally that made a contribution to the show?
Absolutely, and I think it's that familiar way that we greet people and interact with people. It's that way of working together. You're there 8-10 hours a day. You become a family. And what's more Italian American than that appreciation for family? And what's more Italian American than telling stories, right? And those two things are what filmmaking is, right? Telling stories, working together as a team.
Because I know John and I have had the conversation, in the past about how Sicily specifically had such a strong culture of a puppetry, right? We're actually planning on having a guest on into an actual doing a postcards episode on Sicilian puppetry, puppet theater, because it was. Even if you watch The Godfather, right? Godfather 2, and you see the feast of, it's kind of like it's St. Rocco in the winter, which didn't happen, but it's based on the St. Rocco Potenza feast that was here in Manhattan by St. Joachim's Church, and you have outside the Sicilian puppet theater. So it's not something that's foreign to our theatrical background, we could say.
One of the subjects I interviewed who didn't make it into the final cut just because of time is Richard Termini. And he grew up, his career was puppetry. And Italian puppetry or traditional puppetry is somewhat different than the Jim Henson form of puppetry. But he actually has a master's degree in puppetry. And what happened was he designed some of the puppets for Sesame Street, and then found a place photographing them. And he's been the set photographer behind the scenes, taking still images for many years. And it's interesting how he, even though he didn't perform, he understands the art of puppetry, and that's why he was able to do better photos than most people who didn't understand puppetry. And that's how he's made a career out of it. And he's a wonderful, interesting, very knowledgeable individual. Maybe he might be good to include in that.
Send him on over.
Absolutely.
But let me ask, because for someone who has nothing more than a cursory understanding of any of this from what I've seen on television, what is the difference between Italian puppetry and Jim Henson puppetry?
Okay, so if you talk about that scene and then puppetry, they build like a fake stage, right, with curtains and they perform marionettes most of the time, but sometimes hand puppets in that thing.
See, I didn't even know the difference.
Yeah.
So marionette is the puppet with the strings.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And then there are hand puppets. And so Jim Henson said, let's do away with that. You know what our borders are going to be? The film frame, or the TV frame, I should say. So that's going to be the frame. And what these puppeteers are doing is they're watching in the television monitor off to the side while they're performing, usually above their head with the puppet. And everything's reversed. So if they want to move to camera right, they have to go real life left. They want to move the other way. So they have to train their brains to do the opposite. And the eyes don't move. So they have to make sure that the eye looks like it's looking into a camera or at the other character. And just takes years of training, and it's really physically demanding. It's amazing how they do what they do.
That's really amazing. You have to really good hand and eye coordination was never my forte, shall we say? So that's a physically must be a physically. Is it? Would you say from someone who's there, it's physically exhausting?
For the puppeteers, yes. They need breaks. Just try to hold your hand over your head with nothing in it. Some of them puppets, weigh 10, 15, 20 pounds.
They're that heavy.
Depending on the type of puppet. Probably more like 10, but even 10 pounds is a lot. So Chrissy Farrar has been writing for the show for many years, and she has just an amazing talent with finding a way to tell a story that both children understand and adults appreciate. Telling stories that talk about the emotional well-being of children without being so obvious, It's just, she really is so talented and gifted. And, she worked on the shows that tried to help military families. There's a lot of military families out there who have children. And these children don't understand, why is daddy going away for, 5 years? Or why do we have to move because mom got another job? So the Sesame Workshop worked with numerous organizations to make stories that help these children understand what they might be going through emotionally and why their parents are doing what they're doing, and understand that, hey, there are other kids going through this too, and you're going to be okay, and your parents love you. And it's just so beautifully written, and she just did an amazing job with those shows.
That's like the Mr. Hooper Rubicon moment.
Yes, and Frankie was actually there for that episode, and he talks about that in the documentary, about how emotional it was to be on set that day.
For those who don't know,
right?
Maybe you want to explain to them what that was and why that was so pivotal.
Yeah. So in I want to say mid '80s or early '80s, one of our main characters, Mr. Hooper, passed away. And the producers decided, so instead of just writing the character off or saying they went on vacation, let's address this. Let's address death, so children can at least get a beginning understanding of what's going on. And they did it through Big Bird's eyes. And basically, Big Bird's like, I drew a painting for you, I drew a picture for you. Here, I drew a picture for Mr. Hooper. And the adults in the show explained to him, well, Mr. Hooper's gone, and he's not coming back. And that is something it was just so pivotal and very new back then, to treat children and to start introducing them to what they're going to be going through in life. It was a very pivotal moment in the show.
Because if I'm correct, that was a sudden death, correct?
Well, he was...
was he ill? But they didn't...
I don't know if he was ill, but I don't know, to be honest, actually.
Because from what I remember now, for us to say it's like 40 years ago, but that it was kind of there wasn't preparation coming in of when this moment happens, how do we handle it? It kind of hit them right away. What's the longest, I don't want to say serving, the people, I don't know the correct word for this, but of the people who work on Sesame Street, how many of them are there really long, like from day one? And are there Italian Americans in that crowd?
Frankie was there on day one of the first taping of the show, and he worked there for many, many years, over 50, because he was at the 50th, the beginning. His segment ends. His birthday coincided with the first day of shooting the 50th season, and the Muppeteers did a really nice tribute to him for that. So it has to be Frank. It has to be Frank. There were numerous individuals who have been there for over 30 years. And the reason is, not only is it, it's a wonderful place to work and the people there are wonderful. It's about the mission. It's about helping children grow smarter, stronger, and kinder. And once you believe in that mission, you don't want to do anything else. because
There's no more important mission in the world.
Exactly.
Right? You're forming the future.
Yeah, and that's why it feels good to go there and to work.
Do you see challenges for what you're doing in the sense that you have kids today that are, like John will say, his daughter just wants to swipe everything. I mean, it's programmed. A 2-year-old now knows to swipe, right? People saying that kids getting books in kindergarten or first grade just instinctually are just trying to do the, swiping on the page. So now you go from when the show started, right, which was a very static world of 3 TV channels, right,
Yeah.
and Tonka trucks and toy water guns and stuff like that. So now kids who are totally engaged in electronic games and electronic entertainment and very short attention spans. What challenges are they providing for Sesame Street, and how are you overcoming them or dealing with them or working with them?
Well, you're right. It's a whole different world. And when we started, we were not the only game in town, but practically the only game in town, the only show that children could watch that their parents felt comfortable with, that they felt that they were actually learning things. And there's studies that they actually were learning things. And children who grew up watching Sesame Street did better in high school. And our dedication is to the child, and the children now are different. So our dedication is, well, how can we meet them where they are? How can we teach them in this new age? So we have many different initiatives, and we research almost everything that you see. We research. We show the child the story, whatever it might be, and we then do tests. How much did they understand before we even go into production, so that we know that when we do air a show, it is getting through to the children. We also say that every season is an experimental season of Sesame Street. Every season we're going to try something different. We're going to try to meet children where they are and to educate them. However, the new media might be, whatever it's on tablet or if it's on their phone or their mother's phone, I should say, we're going to be there and trying to meet them and trying to educate them.
So how many years have you worked on Sesame Street? What brought you to Sesame Street? Did you plan on it? Did it just kind of happen?
I really lucked into it. And just like Sesame Street was somewhat, the idea was founded at a cocktail party. I went to a cocktail party, and one of my friend's wives, at the time, girlfriend, was working there, and they said, I think we need someone. I think we need an editor. Would you be interested? And at the time, I was producing and directing and editing, and I said, sure, let me see what this is about. And, you walk through the door, and it's a very colorful office. There's stuffed animals everywhere. The people were wonderful. The work was wonderful. And, I never left.
That's such a prestigious job. Especially somebody from our generation, right? When there were 3 TV channels. You had to hear Sesame Street and said, wow, it's like the mountaintop. You could do as well, but you'll never do better.
It's just being part of the history of television, being part of a New York kind of based brand. It's a great feeling. It's wonderful.
Did you go to school for children's television? Was it just media? Like what was the background? What skill set did you bring? What did you go to school for that played out on Sesame Street?
I went to school for film and television production. Worked on films, worked on television, worked on independent video productions, worked on behind the scenes of fashion shows. Everything led to that point. As I said earlier, I was producing and directing, and then I learned to edit, and editing made me a better producer and director. And it's probably one of my strongest skill sets. And so, I had been studying this for a while. When I watch a movie, I'm analyzing it as I'm enjoying it. I like what they did there with the lighting. I like what they did there with the sound design. And that's what actually led me to, I also teach at the new school at night.
Very nice.
Yeah. So,
nice. Excuse me,
I
Professor.
love it. Yes,
Had we
you're
known,
a professor.
Yeah, but we would have done the Italian thing, and we would have exchanged the formalities. Yes, Professor. No, Professor.
Yes.
We love that. Mm-hmm. It's nice.
Yeah.
It's a nice feather in the Italian cap.
Absolutely. It's great to work with people who, are just starting out and they get excited to do the slate or the clapboard. you know? And, you know, for us, it's kind of like on a set, you're like, okay, yeah, we've seen it a million times. But for someone who's never done it, you see someone and they get you so excited about, wow, I'm starting my career, you know?
How are those students different from when you were in school for the same thing? Because, I mean, it would have been the same classes, but X amount of years previous.
It's really the technology. You know, right now, you know, you have a powerful film camera in your phone. You know, back in the when we were starting out, you know, it was the television cameras were very large, or you had to shoot film and it had to be developed. You know, it was a whole different process. Now you could shoot a feature film with your phone and edit it with your computer. That wasn't possible when, you know, I started out. And that's really media is now all around them. You know, we had to sit in front of a television or go to a movie theater. They are, again, carrying that with them in their pocket. So it's a whole different process. And I think they're much more visually astute, you know, but you still have to learn the craft. And there's still things that hold true about, you know, knowing how to compose a shot nicely, knowing what good sound is like, knowing what good lighting is like. And that's what they're engaged in now, you know. So some things are very different and some things are the same.
So Chrissy Ferrara was a big part of the documentary, am I right?
Absolutely, you know, and in her segment, we talk about how she appreciated the show growing up. And her segment starts with her mom saying, you know, I think you're going to work for that show one day. And she had at that age, she had no idea that was even a possibility. And it just wound up happening.
Have you had different ethnic groups advocate that they didn't feel that they wanted representation? Or like, you know, like, because my thing is, like, America's so diverse now, right? So when you take Sesame Street in the early years, it was a simpler cast to throw to have a lot of representation. Right, but America's so diverse now? I mean, like, how do you incorporate that now in the show? Because like even New York, like Queens, right, the most diverse place in the world. Is there any kind of, and I don't know how like attention to it. I mean, in the sense that not that it needs to be attention to it, but that was so much a part of who you were, right? How do you get 250 nationalities represented, or can you do that?
Well, I mean, I think everyone is always going to feel like either they don't have enough or the representation. Maria, the character Sonia Manzana, who plays Maria, is like, you know, I don't have to represent all Hispanic Americans, and that's the problem. People think you have to represent everyone, and I can only do myself. And there was a recent initiative where we introduced a Korean Muppet. Usually our Muppets were
purple, green, orange.
Well, you know, in recent years, we've tried to represent different ethnicities, such as Korean American, Filipino American, and even Italian American Muppet.
You know,
should we send Cookie Monster biscuits? Like, should we send them over?
You know, you just made me
He
think
would
about
love
this
that.
now.
Is that a possibility?
That is absolutely.
Can we deliver over?
So I had no idea there was an Italian American Muppet out there. And now I'm like obviously excited, but it's coincidental because, you know, I'm a designer. I can't help but Italianize stuff. That's what I do. I take logos, I make them about being Italian. You're sitting on an ode to Starbucks over there. But I did have something that I have been saving because I thought, you know, I knew you were going to come in. So this is a design I made, and I wanted to print it nicer on a poster for you, but I didn't have the time. But this is my take on the Mulberry Street Muppets. And Nikki, we could put this on the screen, I think, but these are the characters that in my universe, they exist on Mulberry Street.
But you'd have to have two Muppets who didn't talk to each other.
Maybe Alberto and
right,
Ernesto
maybe Oscar.
Maybe they don't talk.
Oscar doesn't talk to Ernie.
Maybe they don't like each other.
And you can't have Oscar and Ernie at the same table at a wedding.
Maybe our version of Ernie and Bert are better that they're rivals instead of friends.
Yeah, that would be a better.
Right? They compete.
No, they were friends and now they don't talk anymore.
That's exactly
now they don't
right.
talk
That's the most
anymore.
Italian thing. So those characters are for you.
That is great. Well, thank you so much.
Cookie Monster claims that
He's the rainbow
Oscar
Cookie Monster.
took my
Yeah,
cookies.
Rainbow Cookie Monster.
Exactly.
We could have a lot of fun with this.
Yeah, Oscar the Grouch.
We are really sick people.
We are,
Not
yeah.
you. You left out of that. I mean, you and I have the, but we're serious. People think that these are the things we think about.
This is what we do. We Italianize everything, and to that end, you have done a great job with this amazing film, Italianizing the behind the scenes and showing that. And you know, I'm so glad that you came to this conclusion at the what used to be the NIAF Expo, because that was the entire point, was to be a clearinghouse for these kind of things, and that makes me feel fantastic. Obviously, the Russo brothers thought so highly of it that it was part of this incredible program. And I just want to say on behalf of our audience and the community and what we do, thank you for doing that.
Oh,
Very, very
absolutely.
much
You
so.
know, I need to thank the Russo brothers for coming up with this idea for telling Italian-American stories, and maybe we can put the link. But, you know, if you have an Italian-American story and you're a filmmaker out there, you should pursue this. These stories need to be told, and you don't need to be Italian-American to be the filmmaker. It just needs to involve the Italian-American experience in some way. And also now NIAF is doing a separate. So now there's 2 opportunities, 2 grants.
Gee, I
What's
wonder
more
how that
Italian than
happened.
that? Yes,
So now
uh-huh.
there's 2 rival
There's
film
two
wars.
film forums.
I wonder what could have
Holy
made that
cow.
happen, John.
I don't
I got to scratch
know.
my
Well,
head.
I don't know.
You know, rather than rivals, they're 2 opportunities.
2 opportunities. Oh, boy.
Competing Italian interests, we always did better.
Yes.
Michelangelo hated Raphael. They couldn't be in the
absolutely right.
same room.
Yes.
Michelangelo used to send spies to see Raphael. Or was it Raphael? Who was his? Was it one of them?
Not my expertise,
Michelangelo
but
hated
it's
somebody.
good
I
enough
think
for
it
me.
was
Yeah, that
Raphael,
could be
right?
one of the
But my
Ninja
thing
Turtles.
is that would we have the Sistine Chapel today?
Yes.
If Michelangelo did not want to outdo. I think it was Raphael, right? He had spies. Oh yeah, he's going to do that dome. I'm going to build a bigger dome, and that's why we are who we are.
That's
my
what-
dome is bigger than your dome.
My dome is better
My
than your
film
dome.
festival is better than your film festival. And I want to compliment the Russo brothers because we constantly say here we have to be people of the book and people of the pocketbook, because Italian Americans have to go into their pockets and they have to buy media that portrays Italian Americans in a positive way. If a guy's a filmmaker, go see the film, go buy the video, go download it and pay the download fees. Someone who wrote a book, go buy the book and buy 10 books. Give it to everybody for Christmas, right? Because if we don't put money behind these things don't happen. They don't happen on their own. And I want to compliment the Russo brothers because they're in an industry where it'd be very easy for them to forget where they came from and give money to a lot of other causes, but not to us. And they set up, and a lot credit goes to their father also, who was the pilot on the Russo ship, Basil Russo, who made sure that they put money to allow people. And it's the great thing is you don't have to be Italian American. You could be from anywhere in the world.
Could be a Muppet.
Right, it could be a Muppet. And if you're doing a project, a documentary on Italian Americans, you have a chance to get funding. So if you're out there, we got to support these things, and I want to give a public compliment on our behalf because it's a sacrifice. Everybody's got to do something.
It's a huge sacrifice.
Some people are going to give millions, and some people give $1, but that dollar goes somewhere. But it also shows, if you see how universities are judged, right? They're judged also on what is the percentage of alumni who give, right? Because that shows, okay, even if you have a school where people didn't get jobs that they can give huge gifts, if 70% of a school is giving, that's a fantastic number.
Yeah.
So Italian Americans have to show that these things are important to them by nickels and dimes are fine. We built a lot on nickels and dimes. We built churches on nickels and
Tons,
dimes.
yeah.
Right?
Every statue to Italian
I
American
think Holy
experience
Rose in
and,
Jersey was like 5 cents a brick. Enough for enough, a nickel here, nickel there. You get a couple of bricks.
Sure, Lady Mount Carmel and Harlem, built by hand, by the community, doing it together. So
And but we have to thank you
yeah,
because you put the time and effort. What qualifies you to be leadership in the tribe, head in the tribe, right? We are a tribe, we are a people, is the fact that you made the commitment, to spotlight Italian Americans doing great work on Sesame Street. I mean, we're the first generation that really grew up with Sesame Street, right? I'm born, it's like new, really practically new. And how many kids, we don't have to explain what Sesame Street is. That shows, in my opinion, the success of what it is, what it's done.
Yeah, and listen, it was a great opportunity for me to tell other people's stories, and that's, I have to thank them. They're the ones who lived it and told these stories, and were nice enough to share it. And my feeling is, let's share these stories. Let's let other people hear them, because they're great stories. They're really great stories.
it takes a certain kind of person. I give him a lot of credit for this. To dig into an individual enough to discover and reveal a story that's there. You know what I mean? And like we do plenty of episodes where he brings in somebody and he goes, my cousin's this person, that person, but like there's a story there, and he loves those. He's like a truffle dog, and it seems like
John gives me the look.
Well, like,
here?
give me an explanation of what's coming up.
After
you know
all
what I mean?
these years, you don't trust me?
No, I do trust you. I have to also.
What was that?
you know,
Reagan was trust but verify. Was that Bush?
I don't know.
I trust you, but
I trust you very much. But you seem like another truffle dog going for the stories.
And that's one of the beautiful things about documentaries is you start off with the question, and then you see where that goes. And you know, we're all being videotaped now, and one of the first things you do is, can I get a sound check? And you ask, what's your name? So I'm doing that with Frank, and I go, Frank, just give me your name. I'm just trying to get a good level. He gave me a 2-minute answer, and it's definitely it's in the documentary because he was originally Gaspare, but in the neighborhood they call him Sonny or Cheech, and I'm glad I'm rolling on this.
That's right.
Because I didn't expect for that answer to right away. He just went right into it, and he has some great stories. I start the documentary with his line, which is, I didn't know I had an accent. Everyone talked like this in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I didn't know until I was in the military and went to the South, and they knew right away.
It's true. Think about that.
I
know a lot of people like that. Would laugh if you told me I had an accent. But
and remember, this is probably 1950s or 60s.
World. Different world.
I think 50s, actually.
We were a complete unknown to people. Now, we've got access to see the film. How does the audience see the film?
We're working right now on distribution. But if your organization has a venue, I'll try to bring it to them directly. It's really a great film to watch as a community. I just had a screening the other day, and there's nothing like watching a film with other people and hearing them laugh, hearing their appreciation for the film. It's just great.
Well, we're going to link John and all of his profiles and access points through our show page and everything we do on social. So if you are out there, especially the groups that are represented in our audience, and you want to do a screening, this is a great opportunity.
You got to do it.
Yeah, you got to do it.
You got to do it because we have to support filmmakers. We have to support what they're doing. And if you want to send out a positive message, which what we're trying to do, and you host this in your local public library, it doesn't have to be at your Italian American Association.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
fine if you do that. That's great.
Yeah.
But there's no reason why it can't be at your public library.
Right. Absolutely right.
To educate the entire community, especially parts of the United States where we're a true minority.
Yeah.
Where statistically, when The Sopranos were going on, I was in California for a wedding. And I started talking to a guy, he was from Utah. And it was at the time, I think it could have been previous to when we had email on the cell phone. So we were in the hotel checking email, and we just started talking. I was, you're from New Jersey? And he started asking me the most ridiculous questions based on him watching The Sopranos, right? And there's pockets out there of America that still have those impressions.
Mm-hmm.
How you dispel them is bringing in somebody that shows, listen, your kids watch Sesame Street. Look who's behind the success of Sesame Street.
Yeah.
It's green, white, and red.
It's green, white, and red. You can.
When we built this country, it wasn't just the roads. That's true. We say it all the time.
We built a lot of streets.
We built a lot of streets, and
Sesame Street is one of them. We know that. That's
there
right.
was an Italian contractor on Sesame Street.
That's
right.
Absolutely right. Yeah. He made
Actually,
great.
there was a set designer for many years.
I can believe
American.
it. If he's pouring concrete, make a step.
Imagine how hard that concrete was to break up.
Yes.
The sledgehammers they took. No break my concrete at all. You'll never make it like that no more. The concrete that no like enough. Forget about.
Somewhere on Sesame Street is a fig tree. I'm sure. I'm buying one of those houses.
Should we come on?
Italians.
We should donate a fig tree to Sesame
That's
Street.
absolutely right. We could do that.
We
Sure.
could donate a fig tree.
Why not?
We could send Cookie Monster cookies.
Biscotti.
Biscotti, yeah.
Exactly. The whole thing.
Then we're going to fight who's Biscotti's got to go to Cookie Monster.
Well, there's plenty of
Rainbow
rivals
cookie.
out
That's
there.
that's
Rainbow
a
cookie.
nice green, white, and red rainbow cookie.
monster. That's my vision. So everybody out there, I'm sure, has been impacted by this wonderful universe on America's favorite street. And now you know, and not only personally, this wonderful Italian American that's there keeping the torch going, but also the many Italian Americans who have been a part of this from the very beginning. So thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.
You're born in Italian. If you want your life to be great, see that you're born in Italiano and your life will be great. See that you're born in Italiano